Fair warning, some of these tales may haunt you long after you've heard them. Before we begin, I request you to like the video and subscribe to the channel. On that note, let's begin. Words unspoken. It was Saturday morning, around 9 o'clock, and I was still in bed when I received a text from my Aunt Marion. Please come visit me as soon as possible. This message was unusual. I hadn't heard from her in months. Marion had been reclusive ever since her son David died 3 years ago in a tragic drowning accident. David was only 8 years old when he fell into the pond on their estate. His death tore her world apart, driving a wedge between her and my uncle. He moved out within the year, leaving Marion to live alone in the house. Marion had always been a vibrant person. Before David's birth, she had a passion for gardening, throwing parties, and traveling. I remembered summers at her house filled with laughter and light. But after David's death, she became a shadow of her former self. Her garden grew wild, her house fell into disrepair, and she slowly cut off contact with friends and family. For a while, Marion kept in touch with me, but her calls became less frequent and then stopped altogether 6 months ago. Now, this cryptic text out of nowhere. I texted back, "Are you okay?" Hours passed without a reply. A gnawing unease settled in my gut. By noon, I was on the road, driving 6 hours to her house. When I arrived, I was struck by how derelict the property had become. The once pristine garden was overgrown with weeds, the fountain was dry, and the house itself seemed to sag under the weight of neglect. It was as though the house mourned alongside her. I knocked on the door and waited. No response. After several tries, I pushed the door open. It wasn't locked. Inside, the air was heavy with an awful staleness. The house smelled of mildew and something faintly metallic. Dust and cobwebs coated every surface. "Aunt Marion?" I called out. My voice echoed through the stillness. The house seemed darker than it should have been, even in the late afternoon light. I found her in the study, slumped in her chair by the window. She looked like she was sleeping, but the eerie stillness of her body told me otherwise. In her lap was a doll, crudely stitched, with mismatched button eyes and straw hair. On the desk in front of her was a framed photo of David, his wide, innocent smile frozen in time. "Aunt Marion?" I reached out to touch her shoulder. Her skin was cold and waxy. My heart sank as I realized she was gone. I backed away, trembling. My foot caught on something, and I stumbled. Looking down, I saw scratches on the hardwood floor. They formed crude shapes, circles, and strange symbols etched deeply into the wood beneath her chair. The police arrived, and after a thorough investigation, they confirmed that Marion had taken her own life by ingesting poison. As her only remaining relative, I inherited the house, along with its secrets. A week after the funeral, I returned to the house to sort through Marion's belongings. The first thing I noticed was the doll. I'd left it in the study, but now it was sitting on the living room sofa. Its crooked button eyes seemed to follow me as I moved through the room. I shoved it into a box with other items and made a note to donate it later. When I stepped outside for air, my gaze drifted to the pond at the edge of the property. The water was dark and stagnant, its surface broken only by the occasional ripple. A chill ran through me as I thought of David's drowning. Walking closer, I noticed something peculiar. There were faint, childlike footprints in the mud leading toward the pond. They stopped abruptly at the water's edge. The sight unnerved me. I decided to focus on the task at hand, cleaning out the house. But the footprints lingered in my mind, a mystery I couldn't shake. The letters. While going through Marion's closet, I discovered a hidden compartment. Inside were old photographs of her, my uncle, and David, pictures of happier times. Beneath them was a stack of letters, all addressed to David. The first letter read, "My dear David, Mommy loved you so much, but I couldn't handle it anymore. I'm sorry for what I did. Please forgive me. I frowned. What was she apologizing for? The next letter was more disturbing. David, you always demanded so much. I tried to love you, but I couldn't. You took everything from me, my time, my happiness. I thought you'd understand when I let you go. The letters grew increasingly erratic, filled with rage and desperation. You won't leave me alone. I hear you laughing at night, running through the halls. Stop this, David. Stop haunting me. The final letter was dated the day she died. David, you've trapped me here for too long, but I've found a way to escape. I'll end this torment and come for you. Even in death, I'll find you. My hands trembled as I read her words. Marion had confessed to drowning her son. That night, I stayed in the house for the first time. It was a mistake. I woke in the middle of the night to the sound of soft footsteps. The air was icy cold, and the faint sound of a child's laughter echoed through the halls. I got out of bed and followed the sound to the study. The doll was back, sitting upright in the chair where Marion had died. Its button eyes gleamed faintly in the moonlight. Then I heard a faint whisper. Mommy didn't love me. I spun around, heart pounding. There was no one there. Determined to uncover the truth, I began digging into the house's history. I found an old journal of Marion's hidden in the attic. In it, she described strange occurrences that started shortly after David was born. Doors slamming, whispers, shadows in the corners of her vision. She believed the house was cursed. One entry caught my attention. The pond calls to him. I've seen him standing at the edge, staring into the water as if something's speaking to him. I'm afraid of what he might find there. Another entry revealed that Marion had sought help from a local psychic who warned her that the land itself was tainted by an old tragedy. A child's spirit lingers here, the psychic had said. Not David, but something older, something darker. The final twist came when I returned to the pond with the doll. I intended to burn it, thinking it might break whatever curse lingered in the house. As I approached the water, I saw something rise from its depths, a small figure, pale and dripping, with hollow eyes that burned with hatred. The doll was wrenched from my hands by an unseen force and pulled into the water. The figure dissolved into ripples, but the laughter, the chilling, childlike laughter, echoed all around me. I fled the house that night and have never returned. It remains empty, but neighbors report seeing a child's figure wandering the grounds. Some say it's David, still searching for his mother. Others believe it's something far darker. The house still stands, a monument to the pain and secrets it holds. I've tried to sell it, but no one stays for long. Tenants complain of sleepless nights and whispers in the dark. Some leave in the middle of the night, too frightened to return. And as for me, I've tried to move on, but the memories haunt me. Sometimes, in the dead of night, I hear the faint sound of laughter. It's always distant, but it's always there. Would you dare to uncover the truth? The secret that haunts. Everything was fine until the local kids started disappearing. My family lives in an affluent neighborhood, the kind where people drive luxury cars and the lawns are always perfectly manicured. My parents, both successful stockbrokers, retired a couple of years ago and now spend their time hosting parties and community events. They're charming, generous, and widely respected pillars of the community, as everyone says. For as long as I can remember, they've been the picture of perfection. Or so I thought. In the past 2 years, 7 children from our neighborhood vanished without a trace. The community was on edge, and my parents were no exception. They gave me the usual warnings. Don't go out alone, be home before dark, and always let them know where I'd be. At the time, I was a carefree teenager who thought the warnings were overblown. I didn't know any of the missing kids personally, and besides, I was always with my best friend Alex. Safety in numbers, right? That's what I thought the evening it all changed. Alex and I were racing as the sun dipped below the horizon, its last rays casting long shadows across the park. He was wearing his signature bubblegum pink t-shirt, a color I always teased him about. I was determined to beat him this time, pushing myself harder than ever. But just as I was about to close the gap, a black-robed figure stepped out from the trees and tripped me. I hit the ground hard, the air knocked out of my lungs. Dazed, I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding with adrenaline and terror. I turned to call out for Alex, but he was gone. So was the figure. I sprinted home, my mind racing with panic and confusion. When I told my parents what had happened, they were furious. Not at the figure or the situation, but at me. How could I have stayed out so late? How could I have been so careless? Their anger felt misplaced, but I couldn't argue. Not with Alex missing. The police were called, and I recounted everything I could remember. A search party was organized, and I joined them, combing through the woods. But Alex was never found. His disappearance became the 8th unsolved case. 2 years later, time passed, and the neighborhood began to heal. My parents decided it was time to move, saying they wanted a fresh start. While packing, I was tasked with clearing out the basement. Normally, the basement was off limits, always locked. But this time, the door was left ajar. Curiosity got the better of me. The basement was dimly lit and smelled faintly of damp wood. As I sorted through dusty boxes, I noticed a discolored patch on the wall. Something about it seemed off. When I tapped it, a hidden panel slid open, revealing a secret compartment. Inside was a small wooden box. My hands trembled as I opened it. The box was filled with plastic bags, each containing a strip of cloth, strands of hair, and, to my horror, a photograph. My stomach churned as I recognized the faces. They were the missing kids. One by one, I sifted through the bags, each discovery making my blood run colder. And then I found it, a bubblegum pink t-shirt, brown hair, and a photo of Alex. I barely managed to put everything back before stumbling upstairs. My mind raced with questions. Could my parents, the loving, generous people I'd known all my life, be involved in something so horrific? The thought seemed impossible, yet the evidence was undeniable. I drove aimlessly for hours, crossing state lines and ditching the car in a motel parking lot. But my paranoia only grew. My parents were powerful, with connections everywhere. How long before they found me? I couldn't go to the police. Without evidence, no one would believe me over them. At the motel, I decided to dig deeper into my parents' past. Using a burner laptop, I searched for anything that might connect them to the missing kids. What I found chilled me to the bone. Decades-old news articles hinted at similar disappearances in towns where my parents had lived before. Each time, they moved shortly after the cases went cold. Just as I was piecing it all together, there was a knock at the door. My heart stopped. Peeking through the peephole, I saw a man in a suit. He didn't look like law enforcement, but something about him screamed danger. I stayed silent, hoping he'd leave. Instead, he slid a note under the door and walked away. The note read, "We need to talk. You're not safe. Meet me at the diner across the street." Against my better judgment, I went. The man claimed to be a private investigator who'd been tracking my parents for years. He confirmed my worst fears. They were serial killers, targeting children and using their charm and influence to cover their tracks. He showed me evidence, photos, documents, even recordings. But he also had bad news. "They know you've seen too much," he said. "They'll stop at nothing to silence you." Now I'm on the run, moving from place to place, always looking over my shoulder. I've started gathering evidence to build a case against my parents, but it's a race against time. They're hunting me, and I'm running out of places to hide. The box in the basement was just the beginning. The real horror is what lies ahead, and I'm terrified I'll never make it out alive. My last dark web encounter. It all began innocently enough. What started as a small idea turned into something I never expected. I had always been good with computers, hacking, and understanding networks, so when I came up with the idea to run a small darknet forum, I thought it would be a fun little project. I wasn't after fame or fortune, just a place to share information, discuss ideas, and be free from the restrictions of mainstream platforms. A place where I could speak my mind and connect with like-minded people. I started small, using my old laptop. I set up the server, configured Tor, ensured all communications were encrypted, and researched the best ways to protect my anonymity. After weeks of reading forums, blogs, and guides, I was confident I had everything locked down. I thought nothing could go wrong. I was wrong. For the first few months, everything was perfect. The forum grew faster than I could have imagined. People flocked to it, donating Bitcoin to keep the site running, sharing ideas, and participating in discussions. I was thrilled. This wasn't just a forum anymore. It was a thriving community. But as the traffic increased, I started to notice things that weren't quite right. Small glitches here and there. My laptop, once my trusty tool, started showing signs of strain. I quickly upgraded to a new PC, one that was custom built for the sole purpose of hosting the forum. I was ready to handle the growing user base, but that was the moment things started to get unsettling. One evening, after working late on a project, I returned home to find my new PC had crashed. It didn't seem like a big deal at first. Computers crash, right? But when I tried rebooting, it was clear something wasn't right. The PC lit up, beeped twice, then shut down again. I thought it was just a faulty component, maybe the RAM. I spent hours troubleshooting it. At one point, I considered calling it a loss and replacing the entire machine, but that seemed excessive. I replaced the RAM, and the issue seemed to resolve itself, at least for a while. But even after the problem was fixed, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. A few weeks later, I was sitting at my desk when I noticed an unread message pop up on my screen. The message itself was simple, just a text file with a few lines of text. But the content of that message made my blood run cold. I know everything about you. At first, I thought it was just another prank, but as I read on, the details became too specific to ignore. My full name, address, phone number, even private information that I thought only I knew. It was a full dossier. How had someone gotten all this? I checked my devices, but everything seemed secure. Or so I thought. The message ended with a chilling statement. You can't hide from me. I'm always watching. I immediately disconnected my PC from the internet, but that only made the paranoia worse. I was never truly alone anymore. Someone out there knew things about me that no one else should. That night, my phone rang. I froze. I didn't recognize the number, but I picked up anyway. A voice on the other end was calm, almost too calm. I know everything about you. You've been a good little boy, but now it's time to pay. I tried to interrupt, but the voice cut me off. 2 Bitcoin. Send it to the wallet I'll send you, or things will get much worse. The call ended abruptly. I sat there, stunned, my hands shaking. I had just enough Bitcoin from the donations to cover the payment. I transferred the funds, hoping that would end it, but it didn't. Later that night, I heard a noise at my door. Someone was knocking. I rushed to the window, my heart racing. Outside, I could see a car parked across the street. A figure was standing next to it. When they saw me looking, they jumped into the car and sped off. I rushed outside, but by the time I got to the door, the car was gone. However, I found something on the ground, an envelope. It wasn't sealed, but there was something inside. I opened it. Inside the envelope were photos. Photos of me, while I was sleeping. The images were edited with strange heart symbols next to my face. Whoever had done this had been outside my house. They had been watching me. I couldn't sleep that night. I felt like I was being suffocated by paranoia. I took the photos to the police, hoping for help, but they were dismissive. Probably just a prank, they told me. Nothing we can do without evidence. But this wasn't a prank. This was real. Whoever was behind this wasn't just trying to scare me. They were watching me. I was being hunted. I reached out to my old friend Marcus. We'd been close for years, but I didn't know who else to trust. I needed a place to stay, someone who could keep me safe. Marcus offered me a spare room, and I moved in with him for a while, hoping it would all blow over. That's when things took another twisted turn. One morning, there was a knock at Marcus' door. Both of us went outside to find an envelope on the ground, just like before. I opened it slowly, dreading what I would find inside. More photos, but these were taken in Marcus' house. The photos showed me sleeping in the guest room. They had found me again. I looked at Marcus, fear overtaking me. "We have to do something," he said, his voice cold. "We can't just keep running." After hours of discussion, Marcus and I came up with a plan. If this person wanted to stalk me, we'd turn the tables. We decided to set a trap. We knew he would come again. So, we prepared. We set up cameras, barricaded the windows, and filled the bed with pillows to make it look like someone was lying in it. We would hide in the room next door, waiting for him to show up. Hours passed. The clock ticked louder and louder. And then it happened, the front door rattled. We held our breath, waiting for the figure to step inside. And then, there he was. I saw the silhouette through the crack in the door. He had a bag, and he stepped quietly into the room. We waited for him to get into position. Then, as planned, we locked the door, trapping him inside. But what happened next shocked us both. The figure froze. There was no movement for a long moment. Then I saw him pull something out of his bag, a gun. My heart stopped. He held up a sign, written in messy handwriting. "I love you." Then, he raised the gun to his head. He pulled the trigger. I was paralyzed. My stomach dropped. Marcus and I both rushed out of the room, but it was too late. The police arrived soon after, guns drawn. We were detained. In the chaos, the police found the man's body, but the horror didn't end there. Hours later, I sat in an interrogation room, my mind reeling. A detective entered, holding a folder. He opened it, revealing more photos. I recognized them instantly. Photos of me, photos of my private life. "Do you know this person?" the detective asked, sliding a picture across the table. I stared at the face. I didn't know her. The detective's next words shattered me. "She's been stalking you for over a year. She's been obsessed with you. From the moment you started the forum, she found you, and she planned to kidnap you." They found a shrine in her house, photos of me from every angle, notes, and a diary detailing her twisted plans. She believed we were in love, that we were meant to be together. Her obsession had spiraled out of control. Don't know what would have happened if Marcus and I hadn't set that trap. I'm lucky to be alive, but that incident changed me forever. I left the dark web behind, deleted every trace of my past, and vowed never to return. Sometimes, late at night, I still feel eyes watching me, and I'll never forget the chilling words that echoed in my mind. "I love you." Midnight terror. It was a quiet evening in the woods, the kind of stillness that blanketed the area once the sun set. The forest seemed to hum with life, but only in subtle ways. Rustling leaves, distant calls of animals, the occasional hoot of an owl. Kevin and his wife, Anna, lived in a secluded house far from the city, surrounded by dense forest and an empty stretch of highway that connected them to the outside world. The house, with its large windows and sprawling porch, was their sanctuary, an escape from the noise and chaos of urban life. They had chosen this remote place years ago, eager for the peace and tranquility it promised. That night, they sat together on their porch, enjoying the serene quiet as they smoked cigarettes under a canopy of stars. The air was cool but not cold, the kind of crisp autumn night that invited reflection. They didn't need to speak much. Each found comfort in the presence of the other, the shared silence that only deepened their bond. The crickets chirped rhythmically, filling the air with a soothing ambience, and the distant call of a coyote reminded them they were, after all, deep in the woods. The stars above twinkled brightly, casting faint shadows that shifted with the breeze. But then, out of nowhere, a piercing scream shattered the calm. It was the kind of scream that stopped time, a woman's cry, raw and filled with terror. Kevin and Anna froze in their chairs, staring at each other in disbelief. The scream carried across the dark night, slicing through the tranquility like a knife. The sound was unmistakable, a cry for help, desperate and urgent. The stillness that had settled over the woods only moments before now felt oppressive, as though the air itself had thickened with dread. "Did you hear that?" Anna's voice trembled, her gaze darting into the darkness beyond their yard. Her eyes were wide, and for the first time in years, Kevin saw fear in her expression. Kevin nodded slowly, his heart pounding in his chest. He strained his ears, trying to discern any more details from the unsettling sound. "I heard it," he replied, his voice low, controlled but laced with concern. He rose from his chair, his senses on high alert. The forest seemed to have swallowed the sound, but the distant cry for help rang in his ears. The screams grew louder, closer now, and unmistakably desperate. The voice that carried across the woods was trembling with panic. "Help me! Please, someone help me!" It was a woman, and she was in distress. The urgency of the call struck Kevin deep in his gut, an instinctive pull to do something, anything, to help. The hair on the back of his neck stood on end, and a chill ran down his spine. Anna's grip tightened on her cigarette, and she glanced nervously around the yard, her mind racing. Who is that? What's happening?" Her voice was shaky, her instincts urging her to go inside, to lock the doors and hide. Kevin didn't answer immediately. Instead, his eyes scanned the dark expanse beyond the house, where the tall trees formed an almost impenetrable barrier between them and the world. His instincts told him something was very wrong. This wasn't a typical animal or wildlife noise. This was human, and it was terrified. Suddenly, in the dim light of the yard, they saw movement. A figure was running along the highway, her silhouette faint but unmistakable. She was stumbling, her steps uneven, as though she had been running for a long time. The woman's form was erratic, like she was dodging something. Someone, and the scream she let out was sharp, a sound that sent a shock of adrenaline through both of them. "Is she running from someone?" Anna whispered, her voice barely audible as she reached for her phone, fumbling with the device in her trembling hands. Kevin nodded grimly, his eyes narrowing as he watched the woman move. She was getting closer, her cries growing louder with each passing second. "I think so," he muttered, already moving toward the edge of their property. He wasn't sure what he was going to do, but he couldn't sit there and do nothing. Before Anna could stop him, Kevin had grabbed his jacket and stepped out onto the driveway. "Kevin, don't!" Anna called after him, her voice a mixture of fear and pleading. But he was already walking toward the edge of their yard, his focus fixed on the woman's frantic movements. She was barely 100 yards away now, her figure more defined in the dim light. The sound of the red sedan screeching to a halt on the side of the highway made Anna freeze in place. The sudden screech of tires echoed in the night air, and before they could process the noise, a loud, angry voice shouted from the car. "You bitch! I'll kill you!" The words were filled with rage, and the force behind them made Anna's stomach turn. The woman's frantic running took on a new urgency as she bolted in the direction of Kevin's yard, her legs barely carrying her fast enough. She was running for her life. The air felt heavy with dread as Anna's phone call to 911 rang through the house. Kevin reached the edge of the yard just in time to see the woman stumble toward him, her face bruised, her clothes torn. She was panting heavily, her breathing ragged, and her eyes wide with terror. Kevin's heart went out to her, and without hesitation, he called out to her, his voice steady but urgent. "Are you okay? What happened?" The woman's chest heaved as she collapsed to the ground, looking up at Kevin with a mixture of disbelief and gratitude. Her voice was hoarse as she tried to speak, but the words came out broken. I took a ride from him," she gasped, her words fragmented as she wiped the sweat and dirt from her face. "He started acting crazy. I saw the duct tape. I knew. I had to jump." She began to tremble, her hands shaking as she struggled to catch her breath. Kevin's gaze flicked to the road, where the red sedan was parked, the engine idling. The man had abandoned it when he saw the woman running. "He was going to hurt me," the woman continued in a whisper, the terror evident in her eyes. "I thought I was going to die." Without a second thought, Kevin stepped forward and helped her to her feet, guiding her toward the house. "Come inside. We'll call the police." Anna, who had been on the phone with 911 the entire time, updated the operator on their location and the situation. The woman's story continued to unfold in small, fragmented sentences as Kevin led her into the house, but her words painted a chilling picture. She had accepted a ride from the man in the red sedan after he had offered her a lift. The journey had started innocently enough, but it quickly took a dark turn. When she noticed the rolls of duct tape and the ropes in the back seat, panic set in. She realized she wasn't just being given a ride, she was being kidnapped. In that moment, she made a split-second decision to escape, throwing herself in the moving car and running as fast as she could, hoping she could get away. Inside, they locked every door and window. Kevin's wife, Anna, quickly ushered their children to their bedroom, instructing them to stay quiet and stay hidden. The house, once a sanctuary of peace and quiet, felt more like a prison now. Each creak of the floorboards and the distant sound of the man's voice outside, sending waves of anxiety through the walls. "I know you're in there." The man's voice was filled with rage, his threats echoing in the night as he pounded on the door. "You can't hide her from me." Anna's heart raced as she gripped the kitchen knife, standing by the door with Kevin. He had already retrieved his gun, his face grim as he stood by, prepared to defend his family if necessary. The woman huddled in a corner, sobbing uncontrollably, her fear palpable. But the police were on their way. Anna shouted at the man, her voice strong despite her fear. "The police are coming. You need to leave now." The man's reply was chilling. "Go ahead and call them. They won't get here in time." His voice was mocking, filled with an unsettling confidence. Kevin and Anna exchanged a look, both of them bracing for what might come next. The pounding on the door grew louder, more insistent. The man was close, too close, and for a moment, they both wondered if they were about to face something far worse than they had imagined. Just as the tension reached its peak, a flash of red and blue illuminated the yard. The man froze, realizing his time had run out. Without another word, he turned and bolted into the woods, disappearing into the night as the police arrived. The officers quickly surrounded the house, securing the perimeter and escorting the woman to safety. Kevin and Anna gave their statements, their hands still shaking from the adrenaline rush. The woman, though still visibly shaken, thanked them profusely, her gratitude evident despite the trauma she had endured. "I don't know what would have happened if you hadn't been here," she whispered, her voice trembling with emotion. As the police scoured the woods, the tension finally began to lift. But the man had vanished, leaving only his abandoned car behind. The officers assured them they would continue the search, but the man was still at large. Days later, a chilling discovery was made deep in the woods, not far from Kevin's home. Police found a makeshift camp hidden among the trees. It was crude, just a few tarps, a sleeping bag, and scattered belongings. Among the items recovered were rolls of duct tape, ropes, and a notebook detailing plans to abduct someone. The discovery sent shivers down Anna's spine. The man had been stalking the area for some time, carefully laying out his plans, waiting for the right moment. Though the immediate danger had passed, the experience left Kevin and Anna shaken. The quiet solitude of their home, once a source of comfort and peace, now felt ominous. They couldn't shake the feeling that the woods around them were no longer as safe as they had once believed. The thought of what could have happened if they hadn't been home that night haunted them. In the days that followed, they installed floodlights and security cameras around their property, taking every precaution to ensure their safety. But even as they tried to regain some sense of normalcy, the memory of that night lingered in their minds, a stark reminder that danger could lurk in the most unexpected places. The demon within. The air in the room was thick with tension, the oppressive silence punctuated only by the sound of Michael's heavy breathing. He stood before me, his eyes wild, his jaw clenched tight. It had been months since things had gone truly wrong between us, but this was something else entirely. I try to brush it off, pretending that maybe things aren't as bad as they seem, as he stares at me with this unsettling intensity. But I know better than to try and deny it anymore. I swallow hard, attempting to steady my voice, trying to sound like myself. "How did you sleep, honey?" I ask, the question more out of habit than anything else. His face twists in disgust. "Shut up. Shut the hell up," he snarls, his hand jerking as he throws his phone across the room, the device colliding with the wall just above my head. I stiffen instinctively, the sound of it hitting the wall sending a spike of adrenaline through me. The anger in his eyes is unfamiliar, more than just rage. It's something primal, something far darker. "You don't even sound like her. You don't move like her. I know a fucking demon when I see one." His voice drops to a low growl, as if the words themselves are poison he can't wait to spew. The weight of his words crushes me, as if everything I am, everything I've done, is now completely irrelevant. I feel my heart race in my chest. He's gone mad. And worse, he believes it. He truly believes that I'm someone or something else. When Michael first decided to go back to seminary school, I supported him. He'd never been religious, not really. He dabbled in faith in his younger years. But it wasn't until he gave up alcohol that he decided to dive headfirst into evangelical theology. At first, I was just so happy he quit drinking. The late-night binges, the fights, the empty promises, those were behind us. The man I married was returning, and I thought maybe this new path would bring us closer together. But as the weeks and months passed, things started to change. The more Michael immersed himself in theology, the more he began to distance himself from me. At first, I thought it was just a phase, a fervent, passionate pursuit of faith. But then the lectures started, the teachings that seemed to echo more in our home than they did in the classroom. It was as if he became obsessed with his new role as a guardian of faith, and I was the one who became the problem. His evangelizing turned into a daily sermon. He spoke in verses, not just when we argued, but throughout our day-to-day life. Every disagreement was an opportunity for him to correct me, reminding me what my role as a wife should be according to the word of the Lord our God. The once welcoming home became a house of judgment, and I began to feel as though I was drowning in his piety. The man I loved was slipping away, and in his place, a stranger emerged. A man who believed that everything in our lives should be governed by his interpretation of the Bible. At first, I tried to bear it. I thought that if I just went along with it, things would settle down. But the rift between us only grew wider as he began to alienate our friends and family. He'd spend hours on the phone, arguing with anyone who didn't share his newfound beliefs. And even when he wasn't speaking to others, his judgmental gaze was always on me. His eyes constantly weighed me down, as if I wasn't doing enough to fulfill my role as his wife, as if I wasn't living according to the true path. The isolation felt suffocating. I wasn't allowed to talk to people without his approval. I couldn't even pick up my own medication without his scrutiny. It became clear to me, this was no longer just about faith. This was about control. And then, about 2 years into his evangelical theology program, I reached my breaking point. I had quietly endured, but my spirit was worn thin. I wanted out. I needed to get out. I told him that I wanted to separate, that I couldn't keep living this way. I expected a fight, a scene, but instead, he took it surprisingly well. He didn't seem angry at first, almost as though he had been waiting for me to say it. And for a brief moment, I thought maybe this would be a smooth, amicable divorce. That was until the seizures started. I'd had them on and off since I got married. They were nothing too serious at first, just brief lapses in awareness, a strange sensation in my body that would leave me disoriented. My general practitioner, a half-dozen nurses, and even a neurologist couldn't figure it out. They all just chalked it up to stress and prescribed anticonvulsants and sedatives. It seemed like a simple enough explanation, but there was something that didn't sit right. Then Michael stopped letting me leave the house. I'd assumed it was because of his increasing paranoia. He was getting more and more entrenched in his beliefs, and now he was convinced that everything around us was a sign of something greater. But when I tried to go out to pick up my medication, he wouldn't let me. It wasn't until he left the house one morning, claiming he was seeking a doctor for a home visit, that I realized just how far gone he really was. He came back hours later, not with a doctor, but with an exorcist. I couldn't even process what was happening at first. The man was dressed in an austere black robe, his eyes as empty as Michael's had become. I was told nothing. I was just dragged into the bedroom, tied to the bed. For 6 days, I was kept like that. The exorcist denied me food, claiming it was necessary to starve the demon out. They burned a piece of firewood near my face, the acrid smell of it clinging to my skin. The fear surged through me every time the exorcist approached, his chants growing louder as he poured foul-tasting tinctures into my mouth, forcing them down my throat. I begged Michael, pleaded with him, but he only watched, his eyes cold and distant. By the end of it, I was a shell of myself. Weak, dehydrated, and terrified, I looked at Michael with pleading eyes, begging him without words to take me to the police. He just looked at me, his expression unreadable. After a brief conversation with the exorcist, the man left, and I was once again at the mercy of my husband's insanity. And now, here we were again, the final confrontation. Michael's gaze remains locked on me, his eyes wide and bloodshot. "You're not her," he repeats, as though he's saying it to convince himself more than me. I've begged him so many times before, but I can't stop. I can't give up now. "Michael, please baby, please believe me." My voice cracks, desperation taking over. My hands tremble as I reach out toward him, hoping for some sign of recognition, some glimpse of the man I once knew. "Michael, I am your wife. I'm Bridget. I married you in my father's backyard on March 15th, 1995. I design clothing. I love my husband Michael dearly, and I am his wife. Bridget, please, baby, just let me go." My words dissolve into a sob, and I can see in his eyes the flicker of something, the briefest hint of doubt, maybe. But then, just as quickly, it vanishes, replaced by that same manic, hateful look. He opens a large glass bottle and walks toward me. I don't even have the energy to scream anymore. I brace myself, thinking he's going to pour another noxious tincture into my mouth, but instead, he empties the entire bottle of alcohol onto my body. The liquid burns my skin, but it's nothing compared to the horror that I feel as he recites a passage, his voice cold and mechanical. "It is by the Spirit of God that I cast out the demons," he says, stepping back. I see the matchbook in his hands, and my heart sinks. I open my mouth to scream, to beg again, but he shoves a rag into my mouth, silencing me. The smell of the alcohol on my skin stings my eyes, and I try to hold on to some last shred of myself, but it's slipping away. "Then the kingdom of God shall come upon you," he finishes, the finality in his tone echoing like the clang of a prison door closing. His eyes meet mine, and for a fleeting moment, I see something behind his madness. There's a question in them. "It's all been you, hasn't it?" My heart screams, but I can't say the words aloud. With a slight nod, he drops the match. I feel the heat of the flame before I hear it. The fire spreads across me, searing away the last of my thoughts, my identity, everything that once was. In his eyes, I can see the answer to my unspoken question. It's always been him. Always. And now, as the world burns around me, I know there's no way out. Thank you all for watching. Please like and subscribe for more scary stories.